Welcome to Simcast, a podcast brought to you by the Society for Imaging Informatics and Medicine. Though we think all of our episodes are special, we're excited to bring you the first episode live from Sim22 and the first in our series of Between Two Fellows, where the Simcast team is joined by our College of Sim Fellows to talk about all things imaging informatics. In this episode, hosts Prasanth and Jason are joined by guests Richard Wiggins and Don Dennison. Our esteemed fellows chat between two ferns and share their wisdom about the next breakthrough in imaging informatics, lessons from their careers, the future of machine learning education, or rather machine learning for education, where to find Rick Wiggins in the head and neck surgery clinic, Don's plan for breaking down informatics silos, and other stream of consciousness thoughts straight from the Informatics Tech Expo at Sim22. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our first episode of Simcast Live and Between Two Fellows.
Welcome to the first ever Between Two Fellows. With us this wonderful afternoon, in the vein of Kool and the Gang, Morris Day and The Time, hot off of their new tour for their album, Getting Wiggy With It, their hot new song, Dicom on Fire, we have Wiggy and the Don. Woo!
It's quite an introduction.
Thank you for joining us. And with me, as always, is Jason Nagels, our soon-to-be AI standard czar.
Standard czar.
He's a standard czar.
It's always good to have a czar.
It's good. It's good to be king. It's good to be the czar, eh?
Yeah.
So, everybody knows about how you guys have a lot of interest in AI, but not many people know about your interest in IA, Informaticists Anonymous.
Yes.
What can you tell us about how you help informaticists and your work with Informaticists Anonymous?
My name's Rick, and I'm an imaging informaticist.
Hi, Rick.
Hi, Rick.
Thank you. It's been 3 days since I've looked at the DICOM header data and tried to figure out what the proprietary DICOM headers really are in the different systems.
So, what do you think is going to be the next big thing, imaging informatics, Dr. Wiggins?
The next big thing. Well, you don't know much about this, probably, Dr. Dennison, but you know, when a PACS system really likes a speech system, sometimes they get together and they merge kind of into one thing.
Right.
And the difference between constructing and deconstructing a PACS and a RISC can be very confusing.
Yep.
I think the next thing is the data, along with machine learning and AI. I think machine learning is still a long way away. People have been talking about it for a long time, but I really think my job is safe for another couple of decades because it's really so much more complicated than what people talk about usually with machine learning. But to me, I guess if you think about it that way, in the big picture, you know, there was a time when the people who owned the land were kind of in control and had all the power. Then the people who own the factories and the machines were in power. I really think in the future, the people who own the data and control the data is going to be a big thing. It's hard to imagine a future where imaging informatics, info tech, and biotech are not going to come together and significantly change everything that we do.
Right.
All the biometrics, the devices that are looking at, you know, the watches tracking your speech. And when you get these numbers, it's really fascinating to me how somebody can make something like an app, and it's a crappy app, and it doesn't really do, but it's collecting this data. And the data in the background could be extremely powerful. And the idea that, you know, you think you got this app and that it's doing something for you, but in reality, it's collecting your data in the background, and you are really the product, not necessarily the customer of the app. So who owns the data and who controls the data, to me, really is going to be the future and how we do it.
So what I think is interesting about that is that throughout my career, I've had several points where talking to an enterprise, maybe they're consolidating systems, maybe they're going to do a big migration out of one system to another, and they're faced with the cost and the time to do that work. And the question comes up about retention. Do we really need a negative ankle x-ray from 15 years ago from a patient who deceased 10 years ago? Like, do we need to pay a vendor to migrate that? Do we need to keep it? So then it comes up, well, what are our policies on retention? And so we go through this whole kind of common flow where it's like, well, what does the national, what do the state rules say about
what are all the regulations and rules?
So they get all that kind of figured out, and then it's like, well, let's keep this amount of data. Well, you want to keep 15 years worth of data, but your archive is only 12 years old. So basically you're keeping all of it. And it's like, well, at what point would it cut off? And then how much money would we save in terms of migration time, migration cost, storage, retention cost?
Completely.
And it's funny because we go through this thing, and basically a lot of times when they ask the radiologist, they say, what should we delete? We say none of it, because it doesn't come out of your...
I want everything for forever.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm in academics.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing, as we go through this, and the IT side of the house, the informatics side of the house, there's a general consensus or a thought that, some of this old data we can get rid of. And usually on the clinical side, just from a comparison point of view, there is a dwindling value in the older exams. A 15-year-old exam is not as valuable as a 15-month-old exam.
If you believe that 90 to 90% of the studies, if you're going to look at it again, it's going to be within 6 months.
Right.
Unless you're an academic shop where maybe you're doing annual follow-ups, lymphoma, things like that. But if you're going to go migrate your data, if you set up a database in the background and start migrating 6 months before you're actually going to have a go live, when you go live, you already have 90 to 95% of every study that's ever going to be pulled up ready to go live on your bench.
But what I think is interesting is like your comments about owning the data, and having the data. I mean, academics, a lot of people are looking at, we're going to use this for machine learning validation or training, all that stuff. So, but it's like this, at some point, there's going to be some dollar value that we're going to gain, but every single day I have to pay for the storage and the staff and all that stuff. It's interesting through, go over, as long as we've been in this, something becomes really a hot topic. Intelligent or lifecycle management, data lifecycle management. We really need this, and then we get something like AI comes along, and it's like, don't get rid of any of that data. It's the same thing. I remember a few years ago, CIO saying there is zero chance we're not doing virtual servers, no specialized hardware, no GPUs. Now it's more GPUs,
zero footprint.
Get as many as we can get in here, because they're using it for all the advanced processing and using it for AI and other things. So it's like...
completely. And the companies are all very interested in those data sets. So they frequently come to us, especially at academic sites, and say, we're willing to let you look at this algorithm and run it and stuff. And while we're here, why don't you just give us access to your data so we can run it and show it to you?
Right.
So you realize that your data is very valuable. And we've got stuff from back in the 90s that we've migrated through a couple of PACS migrations over and over again. And when you're thinking about unannotated data for unsupervised machine learning and running those algorithms, that is extremely valuable. So you really want to know who controls that data. Is it you? Is it your director of imaging informatics at your shop? Is it your institution?
Right.
Is it the site or anything else? But the companies now all want that data to try to run everything. And then you have the idea of inter and intra-institutional. If you have an algorithm that's 95% in your data set, that's great. But if you gave me your algorithm and I ran it on mine and it was also 90%, that's amazingly better.
Right.
So we're going to see more and more people at different sites running each other's algorithms. And that's why a lot of the vendors are looking at algorithm markets. So they have their own main products that they're selling. And then on the side, they're selling up a little market where people can upload and download and run algorithms and different little cutesy add-ons to their system.
Yeah.
So I have a question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Given all these apps are tracking this and tracking that, and given the push into surveillance capitalism that we've been seeing, and then things like GDPR and the fight, the push back on that, how does this affect the Don Mobile?
My car? Are you talking about the little car that I was going to get me?
I want to know how the Don Mobile is faring with all of these controversies around it.
Yeah, so this is an inside joke. So I was going to buy a Shriner car, and I literally designed it up. I found the company. I was going to have it shipped, but the customs to get it into Canada was so expensive. That was the Don Mobile. I have no idea how that relates.
Don't you know how to bribe people in Canada? What is this?
Anyways.
So I do have a question that might a little bit more on topic in the sense of, but I love questions about the Don Mobile. You've piqued my interest. But
next we'll talk about Batman.
I'm curious if you've seen any business cases done. There is
on topic.
Your secret identity has been revealed. I'm curious if there's been any business cases that you've seen. There is a cost when it comes to lifecycle management and taking old data away.
Yep.
And comparing that cost with retaining the data. And so where does that level out? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is where you go through all the reasons to keep something and go all the reasons to get rid of something in data. And you're right, there's a cost. Even just you can stop storing something, and assuming it's a modern system, you can free up that storage pool and reallocate it for use. So you can save things on that. But sooner or later, those drives get old and you got to replace them anyways. But one of the things I found was surprising. It was many years ago, but it was in a meeting. It was a very large health system. And one of the executives basically said, we want to delete data at the earliest possible time that we can legally do it.
That's a legal guy.
And they went through, they're deployed in many states. They've gone through each state, figured out exactly when they can do it. And he openly said this, and this is something you don't ever hear usually in things, is their view was they have the report, that's being stored, that's the result. But the data that was used to derive that report, if it's still around, this is way before AI, this is like 10, 15 years ago, they basically said some technology is going to come along. It's going to crawl through this archive. It's going to find out where all the bodies are buried and how wrong our doctors were.
Exactly.
And it's going to be a gold mine for lawyers. So if we don't have the images anymore, then we could get rid of them. And then
The doctors
only
want
one
to keep
truth,
it forever. The lawyers want to
Right.
get rid of it all as soon as possible.
Habeas corpus. If there's no body, there's no proof.
Exactly. And it goes back to the lifecycle management. When we talk about these possibility or these things you have to consider. So people will look and say, oh, it's older than this, and so we're allowed to delete it. Well, imagine the timing of it. So let's say you purge your oldest stuff, your candidate stuff, once a quarter, like say 4 times a year doing it, because you're not doing it like, oh, it's 10 years in 1 second, delete the image. It's usually done in kind of bulk batches.
Right.
So let's assume that happens, in January or whatever. Unbeknownst to you in imaging, in December, a patient sued, and now, conveniently, you just deleted a bunch of the data. It's going to look bad. So now you have to take your candidate list and say, are any of these patients, the peds and the mammal stuff is obvious. We know that stuff. Are they participating in any type of other disease surveillance, like asbestos or anything like that you need to keep data around because there's a secondary need for it? Or legal discovery? We have to go through and say,
How do you tag all of those cases?
And tag all that stuff. So, and I think, and then also look at things like, whether they've deceased or not. Like, is the patient still alive and how long have they been dead? That kind of thing. But that only works if they happen to die in your care, at your health system. If they died a state over, you don't know they're dead.
You may never know.
Right. So I think it's one of these multifaceted things about delete and keep. And I find it amazing that we go through these waves of like, okay, it's going to get too expensive. We got to cut costs and delete everything. And then AI comes around. Don't delete anything. We need all of it. This is going to make us all billionaires. This data is so valuable. Dr. Wiggins told us we're going to retire rich.
Rich, I say.
I'm an
rich.
academic, so I already know that.
It's like the new oil, right?
Yes.
We're sitting on a ton of data.
Yeah.
We can sell it all.
Yeah.
I'm curious as well. So, Rick, you said kind of that old data, like maybe say it's from 1999 or something like that. I'm just curious, how well would that work as far as kind of like training AI models on some of this older data that may not necessarily,
Yeah, that's the whole idea of supervised and unsupervised. So when you're doing the machine learning algorithms, the data sets and the annotated data sets are much more valuable. So if you have somebody who's an expert in something and they go through and look at all the MSK cases and they outline and annotate everything, that data set is much more valuable. That is a huge amount of time to sit down and go do all of it. But if you're just trying to do unsupervised learning, I don't know what any of these studies show, but they have some body part, use feature detection, auto-segmentation, analyze every pixel in every image, and then next time I give you an image, you say, I don't know what this is, but this is not on the millions of studies I've ever looked at. The unsupervised machine learning is what a lot of people with the machine algorithms are just going to sites and saying, can we have access to all your data while we're here? And the sites that don't know about that don't realize how amazingly valuable their data is.
Yeah, and you got to wonder, like, something from 99 that hasn't been brought up in a while, how fresh are the ones and zeros, right? Because entropy tells us that at some point, that 1 is going to flip to a 0, and that 0 is going to flip to a 1, right? We know this.
You took the blue pill, and it's all over.
It's all over, right? And then it changes the entire data, right? Because now suddenly a white pixel turns black, right? And we know this from physics.
Right.
It's not something I'm making up
Is
here.
it really
right?
a lossy compression algorithm, or is it diagnostically lossless?
Right.
And then it's really lossy, but we don't think it'll change your diagnosis as a radiologist.
Because especially when you pull it up and put it back, then there's a bit of a check, right? Because you
and every time you migrate, you may lose 10 to 15% of your data anyway.
And now suddenly, like, is that study from 99 even usable as part of unfiltered set, right? So for like validation, right? Because if you pull it up and you're going to do the annotation and stuff on it, you can look at it like, this doesn't quite look right. Something's up, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't do that, now suddenly you dump that into the bin, into the hopper. Let's see what it does. Like, I don't know. At some point, you're going to have to cut off.
And even on the clinical side, you never know what's going to be valuable in the future. I'm looking at stuff sometimes in the low neck, And sometimes there's an old CT of the chest from 10 years ago, and it turns out you can see the thyroid, and that thing was valuable. Sometimes the finding is only on the scanogram on the MR or the scout on the CT. And you don't know that sometimes until you pull it up and actually look at it. And all of this data is something that we just kind of throw away.
Right.
There's all this compression that goes along. I used to do angio. We would do one run of a vessel, and we would take a whole bunch of images, and the tech at some later time would just choose, seemingly arbitrarily, which images they thought were the best. And I would come back, the next day or a couple hours later when I dictated, I said, why didn't you save the one image that showed the arterial venous connection? Oh, well, I saw it. Yeah. But that was the one most important. That's a type of compression that's going on all the time in the background.
So here's an interesting question. How often do you get into arguments with chest radiologists where you say, oh, that is the low neck, and they say, no, that's the high chest?
I never get into that argument. I'm only interested in the head and neck. So below the clavicles is the strange infraclavicular zone of uncertainty, which I'm not interested in.
That's still part of the thorax.
No,
right?
I'm very lucky that I'm in a shop where I have good guys and we all talk to each other and figure it out.
I'm just curious because that seems like a point of contention. Like, no. That's clearly high chest zone, not low neck zone.
Yeah, that is a hard thing. So for me as a head and neck radiologist, I don't want to be scared to go down the thoracic inlet, and the opposite for the chest guys. Every now and then there's a finding in the thyroid, parathyroid, something else that they need to be sure they mention. And I actually have a horrible example of that. And we want to mention stuff in the other reports. I always harass the students about this. If you do see something in the chest, don't just say that's described in the chest report. So one of the worst examples we had a couple of years ago, there was a patient who had a tumor of their trachea kind of going up and down. And the soft tissue neck cut off the bottom of the tumor, and the chest CT cut off the top of the tumor. So we said the tumor, was about this big, and the chest guy said it was about this big. But if you put it together, it was actually 6 centimeters. And that's too long to do a pull-up and reconstruct the trachea. And the guys didn't know this. So he ended up doing a peek and shriek, going to the operating room at $100 a minute to open up this guy, because we said there was a 2 centimeter top to bottom lesion, and the chest guy said it was 3 centimeters. But the overlap, so it was actually 6 centimeters top to bottom.
Wow.
So you have to talk to these guys and include them. So I try to harass my students that not just say the chest reports are in the chest, but give us a little something. Please see the chest report for discussion of the rib fractures and the pleural-based lesion that's on the side. You have to have this communication back and forth.
Yeah.
Obviously, specialization is the natural evolution of radiology.
Right.
In academics, we don't have radiologists anymore. You have nukes guys at chest and MSK and everything else. So you have to pay attention to each other. And we do have a pretty good system where we go in each other's rooms and, hey, can you look at this? What does it mean? What does it do? You have to have that back and forth communication.
Yeah, and it also brings up, where do you put the dividing line, right? Like, how do you draw the body map, right? So how does this fall in one bucket versus another? And every place is going to be
different. People all
different.
want stuff in different buckets.
Right.
As I was talking this morning, we're working on all this digital teaching file stuff. I really wanted all the cranial nerves and the skull base and the cavernous sinuses to be in the head and neck world.
Yeah.
But I was arguing with the senior person who always got their way. So everything went to the right. But you always have people argue about these different body parts and where does this live and where it should be all the time.
So the rank rule applied.
But you have to,
rank makes
the rank rules. Yeah. So you have to understand that there's some overlap and be able to communicate well with the referring docs, just like we do with the surgeons and everybody else that we work with.
And this is why I lose all my arguments with you.
This stuff is terrifying. You guys realize that, right?
I'm terrified every day.
It's like you go along as you're just a person, and once in a while you're a patient, and then you sit and it's like they can't agree on what part of the body each of them owns, and neither of them knows what the other one's doing, and the pictures are all gray, but
exactly.
Some of them you can make sense of.
And everybody knows their little part, but they have no idea about that part that's over there.
Well, I go into work every day afraid that Lord Wiggins is going to come by and just like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you?
You missed this thing in the parotid.
Yeah.
The one thing I think for me...
Bad informaticist.
Getting into imaging informatics, that was the most terrifying thing was the realization that, at 4:50, my exam is being read by an attending and a resident, and there's a conference, and they're looking at all the clinical data, and they're comparing it against my prior and everything. But at 5:01, there's a fax order going out. Only the current is going out to a telerad. They're sending a 2-sentence report back, and the same institution, this is what I'm getting, because you get these night reads, and they just fire it out, and they're not looking at EMR data. Half the time, they're not looking at priors. No markups are coming back. And it's like, but I went through the same tube. Pictures came out of the same box. But because of the timing of the day, completely different level of
There are a lot
vigilance.
of shops like that. There are mighty big academic shops on the Northeast that look at late time coverage And they brought people over from India, had them trained, get institutional accreditation, state licensure, sent them back to India. And they said, this will be great. This is a guy who's on our faculty and he reads studies at night. It turns out that Joe Blow plumber was not happy when he went to the mighty academic shop and found out some guy in India was reading a study and not the guy who was over there. So they had to stop doing that.
Right.
Yeah, there are tons of studies that talk about this. Like they look at judges, like if their team won the Super Bowl, what were their judgments that next weekend? Or if their team lost?
Biases are bad.
Biases, exactly. So
The
now
implicit and explicit biases affect
talking
us all.
about at 4:50 or 5:00, right? Like it's the end of the day for one person, beginning of the day for another person potentially. Like there are all sorts of other issues.
What is your caffeine level at the time?
Yeah. Your
I have
irritation
studies
level.
where I measure stuff, and there was a study from 15 years ago, and I pull it up and I measure. And just for fun, I look at the old report, and I was going, oh my God, this guy's crazy. Who read this? He was way off on the measurements. And I look at it, and it was me.
Yeah.
So I totally know now that my caffeine levels, if it's in the morning or if it's at night, I'm going to read that study completely different. Confirmation bias, implicit bias, explicit bias is something that affects us all. And we try to deny it and say we don't, but it is around us all the time. We have to pay attention to that. The amazing thing about the objectivity of artificial intelligence, which is in machine learning, the way people think about it also, they're often scared about consciousness and when it will have empathy. But it's really just problem solving that we're all talking about. We want machine learning and AI to do the problem solving part. We don't want it to achieve consciousness, sentience, and realize that it could make a lot more paper clips if there were less humans in the way. That's not what we're really thinking about. We just want it to do the problem solving. And that's something that it can get to and help us with. And it's going to do objectively, and it's going to do it the exact same every time. Doesn't matter if it's 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. It has no caffeine level, whether or not it just went to Starbucks and perked up. It'll be exactly the same. That's going to be great.
So here's the thing when it comes to AI, like at SIM and a lot of the people talk about, they are radiologists or physicians. And so that we're looking at it with the eye of, patient care. But we're assuming, I think, in many cases, that the basic fundamental systems of economics, deliver a service, get paid a fee, that kind of thing. So there's a few things I think about. So first of all, if I'm a CIO and I go out and I pay $1 million for some AI that dramatically reduces something that would take you 20 minutes to do all this stuff, do all these measurements, and it just boom, it does it. Now you feel great because it's something you didn't want to do, but it's already being done. But if there's income coming into it, either cost savings or revenue coming into it, it's going to go into my pocket. I'm the CIO. And I add another AI. And next thing you know, it's like, I want to fund as many AIs as I can because I can.
What's the ROI on this?
Cost
instead of those humans.
I'm going to start doing some of this fancy billing that you guys have, and I'm going to fund a giant CIO team or a giant IT team. And then I think about, okay, that's even within the same realm. What about like consumer-driven stuff? Like I ask for my images every time I get imaging. I always tell all my friends, just ask for your images. They have to give it to them, at least in Canada by law, they have to give it to you. They can charge a small fee. And I said, get them. And I'm like, what's preventing a system or a vendor of some kind? And they don't even need to be in North America. They just have to have a cloud presence. And I upload my MR and it runs and runs. And every once in a while, just like the 23andMe, some discovery will happen and they'll ping you and say, hey, this is what we now know. And eventually it starts telling me stuff. Now I have this consumer-driven app, which can give me insights that perhaps the RAD wasn't asked about that part. So they didn't comment on it kind of thing. So now I learn. And then I'm saying, well, what about lawyers, right? If I get access to this data and I'm going to go out, I'm going to take a bet, I'm going to take several $1 million, buy a bunch of AI. I'm going to go and I'm going to tell every person coming off the bus to ask for their images. I'm going to park up outside your academic health center and say, did you get your image? If you give them to me, I'll give you $10. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run them through an algorithm and I'm going to find every mistake those doctors made. And if I find something, my little software finds something in the cloud, we're going to sue them and you're going to get 70% of the money. And I'm going to give you
their AI will automatically file the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'll write the brief and everything.
Just like once the stuff becomes, the data is portable now, but once the cost to look at the data, even by a computer vision type thing, is low enough, you can do it retrospectively. And I think that there's going to be all kinds of people mining for even legitimate things that most doctors would have missed or it wasn't that important. They're going to try and find a narrative or some expert who says it was important, and they're going to go after it.
And that's what the legal is scary. On the patient care side, it's very interesting because you'll get the Google answer and you'll get the IBM or the Microsoft answer, Baidu, whatever
Samsung,
system you have. And if you don't like this one, you can ask that AI system to look at your images also. And and tell you, upload all your information. That was what we're all excited about Microsoft Health and Google Health things years ago, that we could upload everything. It could be shared with anybody, anywhere, all the time.
Right.
Well, here we can even layer it even further. So we have medical formularies, prescriptions, right? So why couldn't insurance companies have AI formularies? You don't happen to have the AI that's on their formulary, and then you take your disc outside. Oh, they're not following your insurance protocol with their AI formula. Bam. They have broken standard of care. We're heading down to court. Even though the AI algorithm your hospital has is validated by the FDA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but because it's not on formulary, now suddenly do you have a problem or not, right?
Right.
The commoditization of radiology in that sense has been very difficult for a lot of people. A lot of young guys who join private practice groups, and some places historically work you like crazy for a couple of years and fire you right before you make partner. With the commoditization of radiology, sometimes now young guys are coming in, going to the C-level suite and saying, you're a radiologist, because they have the data and they know how to look at it. Your radiologists are charging you about $30 a study, but we can do it for 25. So sometimes instead of all the young guys getting fired right before they get partnered, now you have young groups coming in who understand the data and informatics, going straight to the C-level suite and getting the entire institutional radiology department with institutional legacy all fired over the weekend, and offer to them, if you want to come back and work for us, you can, but you're going to get paid out here instead of because they understand this data and how it works for everything. For everything, that C-level suite ROI discussion is a big deal, which is hard to explain for the patient initiative. You think about patient portals. I'm a doctor, open source. I'm a teacher and an educator. I want the patients to have access to this. I want to have a patient portal where they can look at their images and look at the report, but they can't see the report too fast because the surgeon gets mad if the patient can get the report before the surgeon sees the report, because then the patient calls the surgeon. Oh my God, my tumor's bigger. What do I do? I don't know. We just did the CT. I haven't gotten the report. What are you talking about? I can look at it in the portal. I can say, but how do I convince the C-level suite to support that portal and pay for it? Because patient access to data is not a good ROI for the C-level suite people. Right. So when you have to present to the C-level suite what that is all the time, is a hard thing. The commoditization of radiology with AI and machine learning and algorithms. How do I convince a patient, as patients get smarter, if there's a gas station on every corner and the price is all about the same, why do you get gas at this place instead of that? The commoditization of radiology is similar. Why do I go to your shop instead of mine? If I can present something that's above and beyond, I'm using these machine learning algorithms that'll help me be able to find the finding better and everything else. That's something to prove that my report might be better than somebody else's, especially in a world where the government can't figure out PAMS and CMS and how to really enact these laws. When are they going to really start charging people for not having a CDS system in place and stuff like that? We have to think about proving our own value. And how am I really better than that guy down the street?
Zarnagels, you had a question, sir.
I did have a question. So just to digress a bit, Rick, you had mentioned kind of the comfort level that Joe Plummer, I think his name was, with having offshore radiologists reviewing their scans, and that these are licensed doctors that happen to be located offshore. So I'm curious, like two questions, I guess, is one is, was that comfort level, is it more tied to the fact that they're just not here, or is it they're not having the same experience as a local radiologist in that organization, in that institution? And do you imagine that there'd be the similar discomfort for Joe Plummer if it's AI involved and not a human?
Well, that is a great thing. And we're into nationalism. And I think from here we can quickly devolve into politics. And then I think we'll bring up sex and religion. And then whether you're a dog person or a cat person, I think is where we'll finally throw down. At the end, this will be the bloodiest between two ferns ever that we've had.
The first one was.
If it was sex and rock and roll,
that was the last time I ever
standoff.
thought about having between two fellas.
I was going to ask you about lyrics and pop songs, but
We can do that another time.
I'm sure you waste neurons on different things.
Yeah.
If I didn't learn all the words to the songs of the 80s and 90s, I'd be really smart. So the problem was partially nationalism. And, people wanted somebody down the street to read it. And it's the same thing we're seeing right now in politics, not just us, but in Europe with Brexit and all over the place. I mean, that is a sticky wicket. That's a whole nother discussion to try to get into. But the problem that people had was they felt like they were going to this big Northeast academic institutional place where they assumed that they're doctors. And when people started to find out that somebody else was doing it, That's a whole nother economics issue. Do you like the fact that your iPhone is only $1,000 instead of $10,000 because they can make it over there and pay those people really cheap? In India, you can pay people really cheap to read these studies, and you can do it with techs. It's not just radiologists. Your techs at your shop can acquire an MRA of anything and send that data to India, and there's a tech over there that can pay half the cost over time to do all the pretty pictures and send it back. That whole economic model is something that's very interesting.
You're kind of painting a bad picture of my people.
Sorry.
It's all this colonialism.
It's not just you.
It's not just me. Yeah,
Don't think you're so special. So we have this environment where people think about these things. And with commoditization, you start thinking about your money and your value. Where are you going to bring yourself and trust yourself to take care with? And so far, I think that's been mostly the same thing with AI. There are a lot of people who buy Teslas and never use the self-driving part. Some people just like driving, but there's still that part. I'm not quite sure I trust this thing yet to do it, which is, again, a whole nother discussion sticking with, if you're in a Tesla and self-driving and the thing fails, who do you sue? Elon? Mm-hmm. Do you sue Tesla? The guy who made the radar, the guy who made the ultrasound, the guy who made the LiDAR radar, the guy who wrote this code. Who are you going to sue for that?
Everyone.
All of them.
Well, yeah, they sue all the doctors at once, and then
you sue everybody and find out who's the biggest pocket, just like in medicine.
And throw it out. Yeah.
Then you get even more complicated in the future with our cars. You'll start to have these odd questions, like the trolley and the people on the railroad. Who do you kill? So if you're in the car, is the car going to mostly save you or save other people around? So just like years ago, people have discussions: are you driving a Prius or a Hummer? You'll have these two different versions of cars that'll keep yourself or save somebody else. So that's the same issue, I think, with having studies read. A lot of people right now, at least, are not happy about the artificial intelligence machine learning system primarily reading their study. I really think it's going to be augmented artificial intelligence. It's going to be assisting us, not replacing, because my job is actually so much more complicated. We've seen this already. For 10 or 15 years, people have been screaming there's not going to be any radiologists in 5 years. And then a lot of them double down 5 years later and say, if you're practicing radiologist in 5 years, you're going to be hurting people and damaging. These people are almost always not radiologists. And it's like everything else, follow the money. And there are always people who are in a profession or a think tank or something that stands to make a lot of money if there's no radiologist in 5 years. The people who are looking at the machine learning algorithms, your fear of it starts to go up until you start running it. And your fear drops way down, I think, usually, when you realize how bad a lot of these algorithms are.
And I think you always have to keep in mind, if I polled my friends, I would say 3 out of 4 of them don't know there's a separate practice of doctor that looks at the images. They think they're doctor.
They still think it's like Grey's Anatomy. Everybody. Yeah. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have no idea how to run a CT scanner or an MRI scanner.
The name radiologist, but they just think, the surgeon is the one who talked about the images. They must have taken the pictures and they must have read them, interpret them, and most people don't see it. So, maybe they'll be upset if it's eliminated, but maybe they never knew it was there to begin with.
That's also another interesting thing. The people who are doing the algorithms, most of the people thinking about machine learning are not looking at what is sometimes low-hanging fruit, workflow. How do we make our FTE and our CPT RVU match? This patient's coming in. How can we use AI to say, this guy's at a distant place and he has low socioeconomic status issues. It would be cheaper for me to hire an Uber for that guy to bring him in rather than my MRI to sit in for an hour. But there's all this low-level workflow with basic, having your FTE match your RVU and CPT with the caseload of coming in. That is much easier than having a computer replace a radiologist. That is way more complicated.
Not as sexy, though.
Yeah, not as sexy. But not as many people are looking at that.
So I cut 30% of the extra clicks and all that stuff out of there. I'm just going to jam more patients through. You're going to be back up to 100%. Like, I hear this story from friends who are radiologists, and they're like, you look at how many image pictures we're going to look at now compared to 10 years ago. I'm like, if anything creates capacity, it will be filled with more work.
Oh my God,
yeah.
They just keep getting more scanners, and they don't always even have techs to run those scanners.
Yeah.
But that's totally true. 30 years ago, a head CT was 12 images. And now, if you do a CTA of the neck, there's over 1,000 images just in the source code, not in any of the recons and everything else. Yeah. And you're responsible for every image. Yeah. What gets even more fun is when the app guy comes and goes over your scanner and realizes that you can just send all the source code directly to the archive. So there are shops where the scanner is acquiring a huge amount of data, sending it all to the archive, and then it's reconstructed, and the reconstructed data is sent to the PACS workstation. Mm-hmm. So when a jury of your peers comes back later and looks at the raw data from the archives, and the tumor is obviously right there. How could you miss that?
Right. And the AI will find it for you.
And AI will find everything, and it does not sleep.
You do a lot of teaching. Where do you see a role for like AI in teaching? Like for residents and stuff, like where they were going to go through things and instead of just having the attendant say, here's all the things you got wrong, knucklehead, they get first a kind computer voice will tell them what they got wrong.
You have to be more gentle with some students.
Yes.
Some you can just yell at.
Yeah.
But others you have to be more calm and just that is a big thing. And I've been thinking more about the asynchronous interactive educational modules and how we can put that together. And I think that's a huge possibility. You know, you don't want to say it out loud, but maybe University of Phoenix and these guys had it right. You make these have online schools and online modules. The past couple of years, we've been looking more and more about remote learning. What can we do virtually and do that? And just like this conference, we're trying to do hybrid. We're recording this for archivable content, you know, that may be valuable in the future, except
certainly not valuable now.
But we'll think about that and how we can save it and do it. Machine learning and the idea of no child left behind is a way to get everybody up to par.
Right.
It's a problem with institutions. You know, they say they're talking about educating, but some are really just doing the basic training and some are just handing out diploma mills without any regard to is there a job market available later. But just like with archivable content, if I make a video of something, if somebody knows it, they can watch it on double speed while they're cooking dinner. And somebody who doesn't know this complex anatomy of the ear can watch it 5 times. And if we're doing some kind of flipped classroom instruction, when they all show up, they all have this level of knowledge, the basic level.
Right.
So in some ways, using technology, even without machine learning and AI, is a great way to educate people asynchronously. So machine learning and AI, along with quizzes and things, will help us identify students who need more help. This guy got remedial. It didn't have as much this. This guy went to a residency where they didn't have as much kidney training or something else. And if we can do this all through machine learning, online, asynchronous, interactive education, it's going to be a great educational learning opportunity for us in the future.
So this also brings up another good point, because there are med schools that have independent study, right? You don't ever have to go to class. You just show up and take the exams. Okay, so why do you have class? Why do you have the school? Getting into medical school just basically means that now I can sit for the USMLE or, you know, pick your licensing exam, right? And most people end up doing like Princeton Review or, you know, whatever, some course so that they can learn the material that's for the exam on the exam, because the exam question and the answer is not the answer in real life. If someone comes in with chest pain, the answer is like EKG, or right. But in real life, it's EKG, oxygen, all these things happen at once. That's real life versus the exam. So then the question becomes, well, what's the value of medical education, right? If you can have somebody go through this course and do well on that test, great. So why aren't we looking at things like teaching better patient interaction, right? So if we look at like ACR, their imaging 2.0, 3.0, whatever it is these days, right? It might be 19.0 at this point. But where it's talking about how the radiologist needs to get out more and interact with patients more and be more visible. So this might be a great opportunity where the AI can sit there and actually teach them the imaging aspects of it. And then we can actually teach like the experiential stuff, where it's, yeah, the percentages are this and this, but, you know, in my experience, it's a little bit this. You see this little tiny little thing here, or now we're actually going to go out on the floor and round with the team, because the AI is cooking all this stuff. We're going to come back and we'll double check some stuff.
It allows you that interactivity.
It allows you that interactivity so that you actually are a consultant.
Yeah, 30 years ago, I was the doctor's doctor.
Yeah.
I had control of the images. If anybody wanted to see something, my God, they had to come down to the reading room and ask me to look at that study. And they had to sit there and wait patiently while I pulled it up.
Yes, my Lord.
And then we all just, then we would all discuss everything. So, you know, there's a huge shift from I'm the doctor's doctor. They come down, they discuss the patient. We all have a discussion about the findings, their clinical exam. What do I see on imaging? And together we come up with a diagnosis and a care plan for the patient. As soon as you install PACS, the images are out on the internet. They think they suddenly don't need you anymore. They see the images and they see the report and they move on and do it. So just like affirmative action pendulum swing back and forth, we have the swing where we're looking at putting reading rooms back in clinics. So I have a head and neck reading room that I put in the head and neck surgery clinic. So I am right there. There's good and bad of that, obviously. You know, the surgeons come by now and they ask me, they walk in the room, hey, I need you to look at the study, pull it up, stop what you're doing. But it's great sometimes, I have to admit, when they bring in the patient. They walk in the room. They actually are very nice to us and respectful. They'll come in with the patient, their family. This is, the doctor. He's the radiologist. He's the one who actually interprets your images. He's going to show it to you and explain what's going on. Then we pull it up before and after. Here's what it is. It was this. We started chemo, and then this happened, and you did radiation, and this happened. This got smaller. This got bigger. Because this is bigger, we're going to think about changing your chemotherapy, and we have this discussion. So it's great that we're kind of embedded back in, the doctor's doctor. We're back in clinical medicine and having that discussion again. In terms of medicine and education, you're exactly right. The things that we used to teach, teaching facts, is very different than I think how we should be doing it now. And it's a huge shift from thinking, it's kind of like the idea of listening to respond versus listening to understand.
Yes, Miller.
Most people listen to respond rather than listening to understand what the other person's saying. So when we think about the important factors that make a good doctor, it's not the same as what it was 30 years ago, where the guy had to memorize all these facts, these issues and pathology and everything else. The facts are on the internet. I don't need to memorize that stuff anymore. So you're exactly right. The stuff that we used to poo-poo is low-level stuff. Emotional intelligence, communication, empathy may actually be the most important things. And in some ways, I think I've kind of thought about this. We've in the past sometimes been ranking people for residency or fellowship. And I talked to the guy and we said, oh, he's great. He's got a great CV. He's already written these articles and he's got books, chapters and everything else. And when I think about it, I said, yeah, he's got all this stuff. But I think it would be painful to sit in a dark room with that guy for 8 hours. I would much rather have this guy who seems excited to be here and wants to be here and everything else. This guy already seems like he knows everything and he has nothing to learn from me. So the emotional intelligence, it's crazy, but if you think, is there a way to actually test pre-medical students for empathy, emotional intelligence, communication, leadership, team building? If there was a way to do that, that may actually be much more important in the future, how we educate our students. And machine learning is something just like an LMS system could teach all of that and the basic things you need.
Yeah. So, Don, I have a question for you. Do you ever sit for about 8 hours with some of your radiologist friends and you poll them about things like, while you're polling them, asking questions about emotional intelligence and
asking radiologists about their emotional intelligence?
Yeah. Well, because you said you poll your radiologist friends. So while you're polling them, do you ask them questions about these things?
No, but what's interesting is, first of all, SIM tends to attract people who have made a decision to learn how to do things better and make improvement. We're already in pre-filter because I find it amazing. I'm going to some hospitals, sit with a rad, and I'm like, okay, we want to learn about what your needs are, what are the pain points, stuff like that. And some of them will say, I can work with anything, don't care. Like they just do not care about the institution. They just want to get through their 8 hours, get their clicks and go home, and that's it. And then there's usually the people you meet at SIM are people who are trying to make things better, trying to find better workflows or process improvement for everybody. So I think we're getting a skew in terms of the type of people who have the right mental makeup for the type of care, at least that we agree is right. Perhaps it's not the most profitable, but it could be the most beneficial for the patient and also for the other clinical colleagues. So, yeah, I haven't really gone around taking surveys, but there is a wide range of attitudes as it comes towards delivering care as a radiologist. Some of them really care and, go to the ends of the earth. And when they see something, that's bad, maybe in a patient or something like that, it affects them. And there are other people, it's like playing an iPad slot game.
If you are treated like a shift worker, your tendency will start to treat the work like shift work.
Yep.
I'm here for this amount of time and I'm here to there. I don't care what the list is or how bad it goes. I'm going to do this or that, and then I'm out of here.
It's almost a fundamental attribution error issue, right? Like behavior is based on situation. So you change the situation to you're a shift worker, behavior is going to move to shift worker.
Going back to education a bit, and I'm curious, you mentioned University of Phoenix, there's Coursera, SIM has, diversified the way that we're training today, and, we have a global track. So for the most part, there's a very static course of how you are going to achieve post-secondary education. And in many ways, it's a social construct of this is how it has to be done. Do you think it's reasonable for us to see any kind of fundamental change in how education is delivered and granted?
Oh, definitely. We're seeing big changes in that. It's actually fascinating, if you let me go for a minute. I didn't know about any of this, but I find this really fascinating. I spend half my time now in the School of Medicine. So a little over 100 years ago, this guy went out and toured every single medical school, like 160 medical schools in North America, and wrote this report, the Flexner Report. And this guy was serious. He took notes on everything and documented it all. And there were cases where this guy was like wined and dined by the dean of the medical school that didn't really have stuff. And just, oh, well, that room's locking. We're remodeling this. You can't go in there. Right. And like he went to the railroad station. And after the dean left, he got off the railroad, got his luggage off, went back, bribed a janitor to let him in the rooms to find out what was really going on. And he wrote this scathing report. He wrote this Flexner report 120 years ago or something. Within a few months of this report, something like 2/3 of all those medical schools closed. Now, unfortunately, a lot of those were low SES, socioeconomic status, BIPOC schools. They were struggling, just do the best they can. But he wrote this scathing report. The amazing thing to me is that the report, even though it was written 120 years ago or so, is still the most common basis for everything we've done in medical education. He talked about what pre-medical students should be, what classes they should take, how medical schools should be set up, first 2 years sitting in class, second 2 years doing clerkships, and postgraduate education, GME, how residencies and fellowships should be scheduled. So one, I'm amazed that this report had such an effect on everything, how everybody treated pre-medical, medical, and post-medical education. And two, I'm amazed that 120 years later, we're still listening to this. Why are we still following this guy? The world is so different now. Why are we still doing something that they were doing 100 years ago? That's not our world anymore. So we are looking at all these different aspects of this and totally changing everything. We're redoing our curriculum. How do we get the students into the clinic easier? If they see a patient, and really think about this, when you see a guy with chest pain and then you go back and study cardiorespiratory physiology, you understand how these things mesh, and it means so much more to you than just sitting in a classroom like I did for 2 years, and then for 2 years being thrown in the clinics and not knowing anything you're doing and totally being lost. Now, they're still teaching to the test. You know, the kids have step 1 and step 2 and these tests, and they have to take. So we do still have to teach to the test to be sure they can meet that. But also, if you're going to redo your curriculum, you have to have the next step. When these guys are looking for residency applications and their GME spots, if you're going to totally change your application, you have to send something out to them explaining what you've done, why it's significant, and where it goes. And strangely, what we're actually doing in our world in promotions, retention, promotion, tenure stuff, we think about the big 3 pillars of medicine: academic, clinical, and research. And you want to show competency in everything, but maybe excellence in 1 or 2. We're looking at, can we do the same thing with medical students? If we want the medical students to be what? You know, scientists, you know, researchers, empathy, communication, all these different things. How do they define those things? How do they show excellence in it? And how do I write a rec letter for this student so that if a program director reads it, he knows where I think he fits on that scale? Really good, amazing. He's the best guy I've ever seen.
So if you don't want to be doing stuff that the same way like we were 100 years ago, do you have a new way of putting your pants on in the morning?
Yes.
Really? Have you patented it and are you going to sell it?
Not yet. If I patent it, then everyone will know about it.
But then how?
And it's a very private thing.
But you can't share that knowledge with the world.
No, not since the wardrobe malfunction years ago. They
I
had
see.
me stand behind the lectern and not move.
I understand. That's probably for the best, Lord Wiggins. I understand. So, well, you know, we're kind of wrapping up on the time that we have with you guys, and I definitely appreciate that we get your undivided attention and learning about all sorts of really cool stuff. Are there any other thoughts that you guys have, closing remarks, or, you know,
What you're looking forward to?
What you're looking forward to? Maybe make fun of the Simcast team a little bit more. I don't know.
You know, one
Weird
thing I
books.
was thinking about, what's something that I think that we should be talking about, and we were just chatting about it before we started, was, and we're doing a session on Saturday that touches a bit on this, is what I'm seeing now compared to, say, like 10 years ago. You'd find those packs and mans who just knew everything. They knew how to do the cabling, knew the storage, knew HL7 DICOM. They could solve any problem. They could interact with the rads. They knew them by their name and could train them, and basically, you know, all of that. And then now that we've moved most of radiology IT staff under enterprise IT, we're seeing a lot of those things. First of all, the jobs are dividing up. You have kind of like back-end system people, and you have front-end analysts, like process improvement, training, front-end clinical stuff. And so there's a lot of optimization and siloization within that. But what I'm finding is, like, a lot of the stuff that I just assumed people working in these areas knew from, like, core concept stuff, you know, how in order, like, what are the identifiers in an order that you want to persist through to DICOM,
Right.
and how is that used, and how do you ensure uniqueness, and all these things. I am detecting unscientifically like kind of a bit of atrophy in that knowledge base. So I think SIM has got its work cut out for it in the fact that I think without the professional development investment on the health system side for the people who are responsible for these systems, because what I'm saying is sometimes they're taking the responsibility of systems and just lumping it under the same group as, say, the EMR, and it's not getting the care and feeding that it should. Mm-hmm. So you go in there and they say, oh, this piece of software doesn't work. I'm like, you haven't set it up to work. I can name 10 enterprises running the same software, and it works. So the software is fine. It's not the car, it's the driver. But they don't know this stuff, right? Like they need to know. And I have a concern that in this striving to get every bit of efficiency out of everything optimized, everything siloed to be just so, we're losing that kind of creative, solution-driven, collaborative type approach to things. Yeah. And it's like, well, this is how the spec says it. This is what the vendor did. Nobody's happy with it, but we're on to the next project.
Yeah.
Right. You'll have to submit a SBAR with a form to go to a committee before I can assign any resources for my team. And by the way, they're already, so many years behind in doing some upgrade they should have done 5 years ago. So it's like one of these things. It's like compared to a few years ago, like people were coming to SIM and like, oh yeah, this was a problem, and here's how we solved it. And it's a really creative way. We found a way to get it done, and we had these great benefits, and everybody's happy. I think those are harder to come by. Like it's going to be harder to take that approach, and I have a concern. So.
Yeah. Specialization pushes against having a broader skill set of range of skills, right?
Yeah. The motivations and what's rewarded, the behaviors that are rewarded, are different than some of the ones that we have used, and in fact, don't achieve the same benefits as the techniques we've used to now. Any closing thoughts?
Or song lyrics?
Yeah.
I have a nice Billy Idol medley you might like. Yeah. I like to sing you off stage with an a cappella that I put together. No, I really think data is the big thing, like we were talking about. The ITS and desktop support, whether that's in radiology or the institution, is a huge difference. I totally agree with you. The specialization is a good thing that these guys know more and more about this, but the personalization, especially in the groups that move their IT, PACS team and risk team and speech team from the radiology department to the institution. We all talk about in enterprise imaging world, everybody having silos of data. The pathologists have their stuff and the dermatologists, and whether that's their external hard drives or their DVDs on their desk, whatever that is. But also everybody has their workflow issues. Everybody has their IT team. Everybody has their own personnel, and that's also in silos. And how we get that together is maybe a little bit easier at academic sites where you can really think about an enterprise imaging governance committee and architecture and make protocols and put that all together. But it's something you really have to plan and put together and really think about. Otherwise, you lose all that personalization. And then your clinicians who are just trying to get the work done complain and can't get their work done when they don't have that personalization in the IT team that they're used to, the guy who knows them by name, like you said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. I think we could go on for a lot longer. And I'm really looking forward to the a cappella Billy Idol sessions. Unfortunately, that won't be cast on the virtual session, but people...
You're getting the hook.
Sad days. It's so hard to find good help these days.
True.
No, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this.
Thank you for the first episode of Between Two Fellows.
Yeah.
Simcast has been brought to you by the Society of Imaging Informatics and Medicine. Please visit our website at siim.org for more information and educational content, including webinars and an archive of prior episodes. Please follow us on Twitter at sim_tweets. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support.